As was said, for those I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Michael Moe. I am the chairman of the Center for Educational Reform, which means that I work for Jeannie Allen, so like we all do. But it's really exciting to be here today, and thank you for your attendance. This is the first conference, education conference after the election, and the one thing that to me that I know when the sun came up in the east on Wednesday morning is whatever side of the aisle you're on, well, 75% of Americans are for school choice and education innovation. And what this conference is all about. We have some amazing speakers today. We've got some amazing entrepreneurs with some very big ideas. And what the STOP Award is about identifying these tremendous entrepreneurs solving one of the biggest issues facing the future of society in America, and that is how to more effectively and efficiently educate our population. Increasingly, it's not just young people, it's an ongoing basis. It's a lifelong learning, which is really going to be the key. Because in a global marketplace, in a knowledge-based economy, what you know, your education makes a difference, not only for an individual, but for a company, and for that matter, a country. I've got the privilege to moderate a really exciting panel right now with some friends and some great leaders in the education space and really in society. So with that, panelists come up and we're going to have a fun conversation. Thank you. I'll start with the former governor of Massachusetts, Jane Swift. And by the way, a great dancer.
Michael and I might occasionally dance on the side. So if anybody wants to put me on Dancing with the Stars, anyway. So I'm Jane Swift. I run a nonprofit, Education at Work, that I'll be excited to talk about. I think a few things. First of all, it's so cool to be in the Ronald Reagan building. I was at the Reagan Institute earlier this year, and this relates to your question. I came of age. We all remember who was president the first time. They sort of remember a campaign, and for me, that was Ronald Reagan. I can remember my dad.
It was Abraham Lincoln, but anyway.
As am I. Somewhat. Anyway, I think that the issue we need to pay attention to, and this is a little self-serving, but I have 3 daughters who are in their 20s. They would follow type. None of them voted for the Republican, and none of them believe they're Republicans today because of the huge gender gap that we have that is particularly acute among young people. And so I think that the opportunity, which I heard Kevin McCarthy talking about this morning, the former speaker, for my party with the wins that happened, and I did not endorse Trump. I have not joined the Never Trump movement, but I've also never voted for him. But I think the opportunity...
You're running out of time, I hate to tell you.
Sorry. All right. The opportunity is...
For voting for Trump.
Oh, I've run out of time for voting for Trump. I thought you meant stops. I think the opportunity is with what was a pretty overwhelming election that pointed out a lot of divides in America is to figure out why young men and young women are experiencing our country differently. And for those of you who are educators doing amazing work, to me, that was the call to action. And just in brief, we can't send all our daughters to college and tell all our sons to be welders. I have nothing against welders. I grew up in a plumbing family. I believe in work-based learning. It's the company I run. I believe in career and technical education and innovations. But I think those folks who think the solution to every problem for young people who are not having success right now in college is to be a welder, have never been plumbers or welders, which many of my family members who are in their 60s have been.
And just a little data point, today 60% of both undergraduate and graduate students are female versus obviously male, which is, when I went to college, it was the exact opposite. My friend Phyllis Lockett from Chicago.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. So I was shocked and not surprised by the results. It was tough. I am a moderate Democrat. And, you know, I went canvassing in Milwaukee, it's very close to Chicago, a couple of weeks ago. and in really tough neighborhoods in Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee. And it stunned me because back in the day, I know a lot of us maybe have grown up in bungalows, you know, those bungalow homes, maybe 1,200 square feet. There were 2 addresses for blocks upon blocks on one bungalow, meaning people can't afford to have a full home. They have to split the home in order to live. And as I was asking people to vote, it occurred to me how often are these people that I'm talking to now talked to, seen, supported in between elections? That is a real big issue. And as I think about the implications of education, where I don't think either candidate, quite frankly, had a strong platform at all, we are in dire straits. We have a crisis. We are losing 2.1 million young people a year who graduate. First of all, 1.2 million dropouts, another 1 million who graduate, attend a 2 or 4 year, but will never attain. That is a pipeline to poverty, to crime, to all of the core issues that are impacting our rural communities, our inner cities, and it's got to get addressed. Education is the root fixer for everything. I wouldn't be here if I didn't have a great education. I'm sure all of you could say the same. And we've got to change this American dream from a myth for too many of our kids.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about it in a few minutes, but I don't know, how many people saw Condoleezza Rice's report that came out a couple of weeks ago? We'll talk about that, but we basically said it's gone from an urgency to an emergency, and it really is a civil rights issue of our time. So Andy, your background, you started in the Clinton administration. You worked kind of both sides of the aisle, and working as secretary, or you're part of the education department, as well as being the CEO of Bellwether.
Right, so I'm on the Board of Education in Virginia. I'm a co-founder and senior partner at Bellwether. I'm not our managing partner, which is great if you know anything about managing a nonprofit in 2024. So I focus on a lot of our external work. I guess, well, 2 things. One, about the election in the Reagan building. Ronald Reagan very famously said that Hispanic Americans were Republicans. They just didn't know it yet, and it turns out he may well have been correct if you look at the returns last night. Something that jumped out at me, Jane talked about the gender gap, but also there's a really pronounced marriage gap. So Harris did very well with unmarried single women. Trump did very well with married women, and that is obviously something that's going to have impact on education policy and something that we should pay attention to. I mean, look, like, it won't surprise you. I am a never Trumper, but you can totally. I was not shocked. It's a strange thing. I had a much better feel for 2016 and 2020 than I did for 2024. It was just hard to tell, and you know, the Democrats raised $1 billion, so you sort of assumed that they'd potentially do a better job getting the vote out than actually happened, and there's plenty of time for postmortems. But I think what's hard to miss is people are super frustrated. I wouldn't read into this a huge endorsement of Trump and MAGA. It's a huge rejection of the Democrats, and the Democrats need to wrestle with that, and a piece of that is what we're talking about. It's education. We've got 1 million people we're taking off the board every year, and later I hope we talk about that in terms of linking, how do you actually link education policy to economic policy. People are frustrated with their job prospects. They're obviously frustrated more recently with like the intense period of inflation we had. And education, I agree with Phil. It's not going to solve all these problems, but it's a piece. And who knows what will happen. A strange thing about President Trump is he was president for 4 years, but he's still a little less predictable than she was in terms of what you could expect. But there's obviously the table set for them if they want to get serious about some of the stuff they're talking about: apprenticeship, school choice, doing more things to empower families with information and so forth. There's an opportunity there. We'll have to see if they get organized and take advantage of it.
So, you know, you talk about the lack of enthusiasm. So in the 2020 election, there was 160 million votes. This election, there was 140 million votes. So we lost 20 million votes in the last election. It seemed like there was a lot of noise, but maybe something that people weren't really getting behind or getting enthusiastic behind. Yeah,
you look at the data, there was tons of double haters. And is it really that hard to figure out why? What was on offer? I mean, from where I sit, what was on offer was not very compelling from either side. You heard a lot of people talking about, okay, is my state a swing state, or am I going to vote? Like a lot of my friends in Massachusetts were like, is this the year I write in none of the above or send a protest vote because I'm frustrated, and Massachusetts wasn't in play. So I think, yeah, I mean, you saw this in the data. It was sort of hidden in plain sight. A lot of Americans were asking, with good reason, 330 million of us, and this is the choice. And it seems like there's a huge opportunity also for some sort of disruptive, more third party as well, because people do not like what's on offer. It's a binary system right now, so they had to make their choice. But anyone thinking everybody's happy and satisfied is misreading what happened on Tuesday.
And so, why do you think? I mean, so 70, like in a country where we can't agree what day of the week it is, when 75% of adults support school choice, charters, innovation in schools. Why do you think that wasn't more of a front and center issue with the candidates? At least it wasn't from my perspective. Phyllis, you were very, before Leap Innovations, you were very active, very involved in the charter movement in Chicago. What do you think it is?
Yes, I'm living in a twisted universe. I mean, look at Chicago right now. I was involved in launching an organization called New Schools for Chicago, and Arnie Duncan was our CEO of our public school system and helped open over 80 schools in our high-need communities. Most of them were charter replications. We started the charter replication movement, and I believe very strongly in choice, and it's slowly getting unraveled with the takeover recently in our public school system. It's interesting. When I hear the Republicans talk about choice now, they're really talking about vouchers. And it's like charters to me, I don't know. I mean, you may know more than Mike, but I'm telling you, I feel like it's fallen off. I mean, it's broader choice, but I mean, it's about parent choice. It's about parents having the money given to the parents, or the money following the student, which I strongly believe in, because parents have got to be in the driver's seat. But the idea around is private schools or homeschooling seems to have won the day, I think, over the charter school movement. And I think we need all of the above.
I think it's all of the above. In Virginia, where your governor basically wrote into the governor's mansion, on a school agenda. How did that work, and how can we done? Why didn't we see that carry over to a broader movement nationally?
Well, I think you did see it. So, Glenn, we're an off-cycle state in Virginia. We're weird in a lot of ways in the Commonwealth. We have one-term governors, and we are off-cycle. So there'll be a gubernatorial race in Virginia next year, and the General Assembly, the seats will all be up. And he got in on intense. I mean, this will sound familiar to anybody who just followed the election the other night. Intense parent dissatisfaction, intense frustration, and the Democrats not paying attention to it and minimizing and vocally minimizing it. And I think what people forgot is that has not all worked its way out. Parents are still frustrated, and you actually saw in Loudoun County more of a shift towards, I think most of you are from here, if you're not, sort of a swing county to the west of D.C. where Dulles Airport is. It swang again, and it looked it's looked more like the Youngkin race than it did like the Biden race in 2020, and there was an assumption that might reset. Parents are still really frustrated. They feel like the schools are not being responsive on learning loss, not addressing their needs, and so forth. I think what's different with this election, though, the people are constrained, and so you had like high support from Hispanics and African Americans for school choice, but people voted along party alignments for pretty obvious reasons. That is changing with this election. It's beginning to change, and that may affect school choice politics in a way where you'll see more attention to it.
Economics, right? Economics was way more important for people than education in this particular race. Folks are trying to figure out how to pay for their groceries, how they're going to pay rent, literally, when I talk to others in my community, they are focused on how they're going to survive versus, broader policy issues that, we all tend to talk about.
And I'm going to bring this to the workforce piece and the work I do today, but here's some stats that startled me that I think also underlie some of the discontent. Over half of young adult workers make less than $35,000 a year. That's why JFF just pointed that out. It's a Georgetown stat. I have 3 daughters who all graduated from college. None of them can live in major cities without support from me. if they want to be in a safe neighborhood, and they want to eat. That is one of my colleagues who's from Chicago, who has one child, said the situation for young adults going into the workforce today is they see no prospects, nor do their parents, for them to begin to amass wealth, and actually they're draining all of our wealth. So it isn't just the most at risk. This is a pervasive issue. One of my daughters, who spends a lot of time, she's getting her master's in social work, wants to do policy and advocacy, bless her heart, never run for office. That's her decision. She was raised by her father. I think that's why. He was a stay-at-home dad. We both raised him. But he definitely inoculated her, don't run for office. Told me the average age of a person buying a house today, you want to guess what it is? 56. Thank you. So she was right, and you are right. That is atrocious. That is atrocious. That is a real statistic. You want to know why people, anybody who's buying a house right now, the average age of a home buyer is 56 years old, which means not a first time, any home buyer, but it means most of the people who are active in the housing market are not young people, which should be generally the case. So, but we work with college students who are traditionally underserved. And there are thousands of students today who think they're doing all the right things. They're going to school. The number one degree of the thousands of students that we serve is computer science. They are graduating, and they're not graduating into jobs that make enough to sustain them or to live in the places where the work is. And corporate America, who gives a lot of talk, and I'm not going to sound like a Republican, I might sound like the populist threat of the party, but there's a reason people are going to that, right? The corporate America talks all the time about wanting to diversify their pipeline, that there's that there's a talent shortage, go major in STEM. There are thousands of kids at affordable colleges, state colleges and universities and community colleges who are majoring in STEM, who are majoring in engineering, who are not getting a job that makes more than $40,000 a year.
See, I think that's an incredibly powerful
broken pipeline.
Well, and again,
Mike, can I say one thing?
Of course.
Just one thing. I was going to say, so if that is your daughter's experience, what do you think Black and brown and low-income kids are experiencing? So that's all I have to say,
I
right?
know.
So now let me
we
reinforce the
serve
fact that a third of young students who are in poverty, only 30% of them will ever make a sustainable wage. So that's why we're seeing the defections on all sides.
Yes. And by the way, 80% of the students we serve are students of color. And the reason I went to work in a nonprofit, which I swore I would never do again, is because exactly what you said, right? If it's even difficult so my kids grew up, I want to come back as one of my children. I was not Black or brown, but I was a kid who was on Pell Grant, whose father had, my dad did not make a lot of money. The combined tuitions of the three of us who were in college was more than his take-home pay. And in our little community, we were thought of as rich because we owned the plumbing company, right?
And
but
you probably owned your home.
10 times.
And you probably owned your home.
Yes.
So all I'm saying is it's all relative, but it's more egregious. It is more egregious
Andy.
on the other side.
I actually want to pick up on that a little bit because on Phyllis's thread. So I'm not especially moved that the average home buyer is in their 50s because it's probably been roughly similar to that. First-time home buyers. And I wish I could remember his name on the fly, but there's an economist who's been doing a lot of work on this. It turns out when you control for things like per capita and age, young people aren't actually particularly worse off than previous generations are. They perceive very much that they are, except for this gap we have, this enormous gap you see that shows up. It shows up racially. It shows up in class ways. It shows up rural in terms of social mobility. It's showing up in our voting patterns. I mean, we saw again a further entrenchment of rural. And so I actually worry if we're not careful, this sort of narrative of it's terrible for everyone and so forth actually distracts attention and focus from what I got in this reform movement to really focus on, which is the kids who are just systematically getting pushed out. The kids who are off the board because they don't have a chance to choose a STEM career because they're not getting out of high school, right?
Well, the problem,
they're not getting into these apprenticeship programs, and I do worry, like most indicators in this, it's actually a strange thing with how angry, I get it, but also most indicators in this country are going the right way if you care about clean air, clean water, people, various quality of life measures and all that. And I think we have to be very careful that if we want young people to get engaged, we have to make sure they understand, and we can't be ones telling them sort of all is lost when this is still a country with a tremendous amount of opportunity and a set of people being systematically excluded from that opportunity, which is why I know a lot of the people in this room, come to work every day.
Jane.
So telling a bunch of young people, so 80% of the students we serve at Education at Work are students of color, 50% are first-generation college students, and that's who I was. Not a person of color, but I was first generation, and you could go to college, you could get a Pell Grant, and you could get a job that gave you social and economic mobility. With all due respect, what the Democrats tried to tell people that things weren't that bad, people disagree. And I have two people that are no longer with us, but my dad, who got me into politics, would say to me, the voters aren't stupid. And so we can all sit here all we want, right, and say it's not that bad for young people. Their perception is it's bad. And so we better address it. And I agree with everything you said on K through 12, but it doesn't get better. You would hope that it would at least get better for the students who found their way to college, and it doesn't, because we aren't giving them the experiences they need to get a good first job. And the second thing is, all people want to know is what's expected of them. And people want to think if you work hard and do the right thing, that there is opportunity. And that's what our young people do not believe. We need a Ronald Reagan who can make people believe in a positive view and to have it match the reality.
So I'm going to give you the last word, and I'm going to create a segue. You look like you want to say something.
Oh, I was just gonna say that it has to start early. Okay. Like we can't wait until kids are ready to go to the workforce. This really does have to start in the middle school range, entering high school, when you can capture young people again, which is why we're having I think the panel earlier today was talking about this extraordinary disengagement epidemic that we're having in this country.
So much to talk about. So we'll have to find a good bar stool somewhere later and solve all these problems. Here I want to say, I do want to make a comment about the point about STEM and STEAM and computer science, because again, you could see this locomotive coming down the tracks, right, where the technology was going to replace the technologist, so it becomes a commoditized career. And so thinking about what are the skills, what is the knowledge, what's the education look like of the future? And I want to talk about that and tie it into the workforce of the future. And this idea of historically you had these silos between education and working, and now you have what I call higher ed, H-I-R-E ed, which you are on the forefront of. So why don't you talk about education at work for just a little bit more, what exactly it is, out of the schools you're working with, we mentioned them, how it works for the student, and what it means for the employer.
So we work with students who have to work, who come from the places that Phyllis was talking about, for whom, even if they're being recruited for a paid internship in some place, they cannot afford to not live in the apartment that they have contracted for to go to school year round. They have to work. And so what we are trying to do is flip the dilemma for those students and provide them with high-quality, resume-worthy, work-based learning opportunities. We work in Tempe, Arizona, Salt Lake City, El Paso. We're moving to New Orleans, and we have some operations in Indianapolis and Northern Kentucky, Southern Ohio. And for our students, they're going to work. And this is the analogy I always use. I have a daughter who works in D1 sports now. And if you're a D1 athlete or if you're a school with Division I sports, the entire college experience is designed to make sure there aren't conflicts between academics and sports. Now, that doesn't mean every kid goes and gets their degree, but you can have class at a certain time, and then you can have practice at a certain time. For our most at-risk students who have to go and work, nobody is negotiating on their behalf, and that's what we do. We have a flexible work schedule and high-quality, resume-worthy jobs where we're the employer of record. So students do the work they have to do to survive and pay for things, but also get the durable skills, the technical credentials, and the work experience that will hopefully put them in a place. And I agree we need to start earlier. My frustration is we're so focused as a sector on starting earlier that we then drop kids at the front door, if they get there, of a college or university and think they're on their own and that everything's going to be fine, and it won't unless we also advocate there.
So carry on what you were saying about earlier. So how can you kind of meld this reality that we have to start earlier, but we also got to be thinking about what is that, what kind of skills and knowledge do people need, students need
Sure.
to thrive?
I've been thinking a lot, Michael, of a broader vision of how do we rethink leveraging AI, leveraging what we know about learning science to restructure this whole disconnected education marketplace we've got, right? Like the whole system is so fragmented between K-12, post-secondary, workforce. There's no correlation. There's no alignment. It is impossible to navigate as a young person. And so what we need to do is we got to capture kids before they lose it, right? Learning science tells us that by the time they reach 8th grade, their occupational identity or sense of self-concept kind of plateaus. And we got to recapture the heart, the passion, the purpose, the belief that I can be more. And that has to get integrated, in my mind, with a scaffolded AI system that can connect experiences online, in person, and scaffold young people from their passions and interests toward these career opportunities. And I really do think, you didn't ask about this, but from a policy standpoint, I agree with you. Corporations who say there's a huge talent gap are not hiring our kids, and there really does need to be incentives for companies to take on what IBM did with the P-TECH model, right? So it should become a requirement that every young person to graduate has to have an internship, has to have an experience. Rod Shetty's work talks about the criticality of social capital. And if our kids don't have that access, if they don't have the opportunity to apply their knowledge, they're going to get lost.
Hey, can I just say one thing? This is probably controversial, but if Elon Musk needs something to do, put him in charge of revising the apprenticeship system. I believe in it, but the federal dollars in the apprenticeship system are so ridiculous and cumbersome that people don't actually use it, but you have entire third-party groups who are making a boatload of money, spending money that isn't actually helping students.
We need to give tax credits to our corporations in these high-growth fields, tax credits to have internships or create internship opportunities, virtual and in person, for our students.
Yeah, I'll just, as an aside, I can tell you what I learned most in college was from the internships I got, by far.
Absolutely.
100%. Mark. Andy.
So a couple of things. If we're tossing out our crazy policy ideas, I've written about what Jane's talking about for a while. Like, it is infuriating to me when you talk to college presidents and they say, well, we really don't know how to support our first-generation students. And it's like, walk down to the athletic department. They're really good at it. I mean, I've seen this with personal experience, what college sports looks like, and I've seen it working. I've taught at large D1 universities. The support is amazing. It's life support, it's coaching, it's helping you with finances, also all the support on academics, note-taking, all of that. And so my sort of off-the-wall policy idea is I've always thought we should start linking Pell Grant eligibility for schools to a common level of support that you're going to provide first-gen and low-income students with the same level of academic support you provide to your athletes, because they know exactly how to do it. They're just doing it for the kids, so it's really exciting to watch, not the kids who get lost and need it as well. And I don't begrudge the athletes. They're basically unpaid employees, so they should get that. But
Not anymore.
There's no reason we shouldn't give it to other kids. On the broader point, I mean, look, Trump in his first term proposed merging the Department of Education and the Department of Labor. And of course, all the usual suspects lost their minds. But like serious people like Tony Carnevale at Georgetown, for instance, were like, actually, there's potentially a lot of merit to that. And I do think, I don't think we should abolish the Department of Education. That's just like a campaign talking point. That's a crazy idea. But we do need to think about how do we restructure it. And one of the things is how do you make 100%. These things work better? Yeah. And there, to what everything's been said, there's huge silos. There's lots of inefficiencies. And at the federal level, if you start to do that, then we can start to address it at high school and elementary school, because the other problem we have is simply most of our strategies on STEM are all about, okay, kids in high school, how do I convince them that they don't want to be a lawyer or an artist or a poet or a financier or whatever? They want to be they want to do STEM. It's too late at that point. If those kids haven't been taking the right classes, really in middle school and beyond, and one of the things we're trying to do in Virginia is our middle school accountability system is now going to have readiness indicators for high school to get kids on track. Our high school one will have ones for going into post-secondary and college and so forth. And until we get those things clear, we're just kind of chasing our tails. And I'm hoping, Donald Trump is right that we need to bring American manufacturing back, but we also need to have a conversation about who's going to do that manufacturing. And I'm hoping we can link those together and have a conversation about creating a more seamless system. And I hope at some point we'll talk about navigation and navigating that system as well. But we've got to first figure out how do you align it better.
And the other crazy idea that I don't think is so crazy, our federal work-study program should be a voucher. And I know, but the money should go with the student. It shouldn't go, and by the way, I'm from Massachusetts, it today goes to most of our oldest, most elite universities who get the bulk of those dollars, not the places where the greatest percentage of at-risk students are being educated. The dollars should go to the student, and then let them use those dollars to find meaningful work, and frankly, it would pair really well with your tax credit idea. So this is our third-party platform.
So
we solved it.
And there's so much I want to talk about, so I want to we're running out of time, so we're going to keep this tighter just so we can finish out strong. Talk about the role of the corporation in the future of learning, the integration with students. We talk about the internships, talk about tax credits, but is the world's changing so fast? You're either going to replace your workforce every 2 years, or you're going to figure out how to help them get the skills they need. I mean, what do you think the role of the corporation is as a major institution for learning in the future?
I'll just say very briefly, we are partnering with Intuit. Intuit is doing it right. They have an online free academy, and that many adults do to become a tax preparer, which is good money, more than you could make as a minimum Pell Grant family makes. And they're empowering us to work with education institutions to pay students to go through that academy to expose them to where they know the shortage will be, which is in the accounting profession.
So we know we have a teacher pipeline crisis. And so you can imagine the lack of career and or CTE educators that are in our school systems. The content is moving so quickly, as you just mentioned. We've got to partner with corporations to provide that content. So our students are getting access to the most recent, relevant information and developing the skills that are going to be most aligned to what the market needs.
So I agree with all this. There's a lot of good examples of what corporations are doing. I'm going to answer from a K-12 perspective, though. I do worry. I hear a lot of conversations. I'm involved in a lot of conversations where companies are coming into K-12 and like, we need you to do this for our workforce. And I'm like, no, that's your job, right? And I'm all for tax credits, particularly in high-need fields that are particularly important to national security, competitiveness, things like that. But I get worried when the pathways become too rigid, and I do worry we're sort of on this path with pathways where we're not thinking about what's the quality of them. We just in Virginia put in place a bunch of stuff to collect baseline data and metrics and better align them, which is crazy that wasn't there in the first place. So I want to make sure schools, I don't like schools being pathways. I want them to be like trampolines so kids can jump to different things. They're prepared to make different choices. The switching costs are very high. They're particularly high for low-income kids. And so we need to involve corporate, but we also need to here are the things you need to do on training. That's your role. And here's the things the schools need to be doing to make sure kids are prepared to take advantage of that. And we're obviously not doing a great job of that, but I do worry too much blending. We lose some of the things that public K-12 schools are supposed to be doing in terms of life preparation and getting kids set up to have choices, not pointing them in a very specific direction.
I wasn't suggesting pointing them in the specific direction, because I think CTE is absolutely, it was really designed for kids who are close to dropping out, or you're not going to college. That's not at all what I'm talking about. There really does need to be a more iterative experience and exposure opportunity, and that first internship is going to leverage a few things. It's going to enable young people to connect to folks that they wouldn't know. It's going to give them experiences that they never would have had. It's going to help them think about what they want to do. So it has to be an iterative process.
Yeah, that wasn't aimed at you, Phyllis. That was actually more what Jane, no, it was more what Jane was talking about earlier, where I have a lot of my colleagues around here are telling everybody at 15 they'll love being HVAC people. And it's like, have you spent your career crawling around in cramped spaces on your hands and knees?
Well, that's the other thing, which is really really is annoying, is this, it's like rushing to the lowest common denominator for our kids, right?
So,
and that is not the goal.
The reason I have dedicated the last 40 years of my life to working in education, first in a public policy and now in the private sector, is because I came from one of those communities where a lot of kids didn't go on, and they went and worked for my family and were plumbers and my nephews and cousins. And guess what? I ended up at Trinity College, which is an elite college, dressed wrong, completely academically unprepared. But my biggest observation was the kids at home were just as smart as the kids that I was going to school with. We just hadn't been given the same opportunities. And by the grace of God, I got there. And that has driven me. And it hasn't changed in 40 years. And we better change it soon, because we see what happens when we don't.
That's awesome. Okay, really quick. President Trump calls you up tonight and offers you to be the Secretary of Education. You have no option. You have to serve your country. What would be your number one priority in 15 seconds or less?
Make sure we use science-backed curriculum in reading, and I'll do Phyllis' thing, but we'll turn federal work study into a voucher.
I would scale the P-TECH program across every corporation in America, and I would ensure data transparency for K-12 post-secondary to economic mobility indicators, and their money would be tied to it.
I would decline, but I would obviously take the call because it's the president, and I would say, Mr. President, respectfully, what I think you should focus on is, one, expanding choices for families, two, navigation. There is an explosion of choice happening in all three sectors, early ed, post-secondary, and K-12. Families have no support to really navigate that, and we could partner with the states. There's a lot that you could do there. And then third, reorient this country back towards, we don't talk about the achievement gap. It's an enormous problem. It leaves people frustrated, and then one of the ways it plays out is people are then frustrated in the political space.
I was off the charts. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.